I can't, apart from my observations on the political process, the National Academy discussion just out is spot on this issue, whether it's executive summary or the report. I don't want to read this. It's what they call scarcity. Scarcity means there is simply not a sufficient quantity of some resource or commodity to satisfy all wants for it. Scarcity is a pervasive phenomenon, persistent. Water scarcity has always been a fact in California, save perhaps for unusually wet periods, and therefore the committee cannot evaluate the items in its charge without addressing scarcity. The magnitude or intensity of scarcity has grown over time, and it continues to grow because demand has grown. There are numerous manifestations of scarcity. Legal rulings that require large allocations of water to support fisheries and environmental flows are a manifestation of scarcity. Concerns about the delta itself and the different positions on how delta water should be allocated are also a manifestation. The failure to acknowledge scarcity as a fact of life and to craft water plans and policies to address scarcity has made the management of delta waters far more difficult than it needs to be. And this discussion in some way relates to, we can't bring ourselves to say clearly to everybody that you can't get everything you want, and we cloak it with this infinitely complex governmental structure and all of these studies and all these research because everyone wants to avoid the conclusion that we all got to tighten our belt a notch to get through the next 50 or 75 years. And that's possible, but folks would like to construct the situation so that somebody else tightens their belt, not them. And it doesn't work well. It can't work well. And so for me, Joe, I'd leave this revised language in about what we might or not do because it kind of sounds that we're serious about saying that statutory duty of the Water Board to set periodically updated standards is serious. And as Hank points out, there are consequences, practical consequences, legal consequences. If you want to see a completed BDCP that is possibly successful, you're going to be required to do something like this. I don't want to weigh in on what the standards could be the same as they are today. I doubt it, but it could be. They're likely to be much more intricate and involved on pulsing and timing of flows. That's what is in our fifth draft Delta Plan. It's what Cliff has told us for 2 years is where science is headed, that it's not just a rate of absolute flow every minute of every day. It's a nuanced judgment and balancing. And by sacrificing serious-sounding language on consequences, we tend to drift into another government report that says, oh yeah, somebody ought to do everything they're ordered to do, and we kind of hope it all works out, when in fact the statute linked the co-equal goals and said you have to meet both of them. And so for me, Hank, your immediate inclination, are there things that are linked? Yeah, sure, things are linked. The decreased reliance in the statute, our advocacy of completion of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, our clear advocacy of completion of it by a date certain, are linked. One of these pins fall out of the puzzle, guess what? It's going to have consequences for the other. I'm in favor of saying that, Joe. I'm in favor of using the National Academy language and their approach and saying it, because I think that provides a level of clarity and understanding. Now, I wouldn't say it in the way Tom suggested we say it, that we start with the delta and determine the adequacy of flow in the delta first. I wouldn't start there, because we're ordered by statute to have a statewide perspective, unlike, I think, any other agency around. And so we have to try to judge and balance off all these complexities. So I commend the reading of the National Academy report, because I think it gives us a way of talking about this that's slightly different, is consistent with the co-equal goals, and provides a little honesty in the overall discussion.
Phil, is it your view that we can't consider BDCP unless the flow standards are completed by the Water Board?
If I were to say it, I'd say, look, guys, you won't be able to conclude the Bay Delta Conservation Plan process and get some protection from legal action to stop it unless you have a relatively contemporaneous review of water flow standards for the Delta, and for the Delta anyway, contemporaneous with it. It's the notion of concurrent action forward. I don't know what the solution to that would be. I don't know what the Water Board would say.
I want to say that we actually have specifics written in law about when we address BDCP. And so I think that's what governs what we can take into account and when we address that. And that review of BDCP comes when the Director of Fish and Game actually certifies.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
And it does not list in their new flow standards. I think it is clear that those are going to be really important, but that is not what the law says.
Well, right. But Phil, if we were to suggest that no water right permit should be approved by the Water Board if they they're not on track to complete their job for the flow standards.
That would mean they could not
how would
implement
you, not as a
BDCP.
matter of law, as a matter of policy, how would you entertain BDCP?
You mean, could you simultaneously?
Yeah.
Suggest you probably couldn't. But Joe's point is correct. We have a focused and relatively narrow role on reviewing BDCP. The BDCP process, however, is premised on the fact they're going to get a broad enough statewide coalition of interest groups. And they've kind of said they're doing the co-equal goals. They haven't pledged it absolutely, but they talk about it. Governor Brown's talked about it. Jerry Merrill endlessly talked about it. And hopefully the package that comes out of BDCP gives them that assurance. But it's hard to imagine they're going to get it if the flow standards are just waiting for some future time. Because that's an encouragement for interest groups. Block the Water Board as best you can in the hopes you can complete the other process. I think that's a game that everybody plays on all sides of the issue, on all of these aspects, and I'd prefer to have us cut through it, use simple language, and say, look, you want to get something done, as we all want to get something done, here's a pretty simple way to do it, see what the facts are, see what the responsible agencies do, and act accordingly. Randy?
I was trying to conceive of a time at which a relatively minor water permit was sought by an agency, and our view would be that shouldn't be entertained while we're approving BDCP with its vast implications for the state water system.
And that is the concern for parties that don't like the language that we have here. If they want to go move an intake, for example, someplace in the watershed from one location to another under the language that we have here, we'd be saying you can't do that. Or we would be recommending to the state board that they not allow that to happen while the state board is working on their flow standard. And that is something that has concerned a number of parties and was one of the reasons why we recommend not including that kind of language in the plan. So I'm going to try and summarize where I think the council's at. I'll bet I see if there's one more comment before I do that.
I'll surprise you because it relates to governance. I think, and narrative, there's the recommendation, but there's also what leads up to it. And I think we need to explain why these things are interrelated, as Randy said, which you said we will, but also why it's important. And one of the things, this is why I'm so strong on how the governance chapter has to be a real chapter about all of this, is to explain this setting where California, despite all of its pride and its environmental and other regulations, has dropped the ball on this compared to any number of other states, whether it's because we don't have groundwater regulation or because and I'm speaking as a former Fed, the state has consistently failed to be able to make hard calls on this, which has left all the water users as well as environmentalists and you name it in a state of limbo. In a fantasy world that people are going to get more water than they can get, which works for some people because they can negotiate for more or whatever. Our whole system doesn't work well. It has the potential to work stunningly well. And part of our job is to create the narrative and the framework where people can see the way forward as opposed to being in denial. And I fully expect that however we would do that would make people of all stripes a little unhappy because they may be people who like to exploit the ambiguity. So I think what comes before and after this section is very important. And I'll just say again that I'm not wedded to what the example of threats would be, however you want to put it, but I think we should have something in there versus nothing. And that's where I am. I'm sort of open to a competition for alternative ideas. But I think we need to make absolutely clear how serious we are that this needs to be done. And without casting aspersions on water boards past and present, it is a very hard thing to do. And we need to help give them the support and the backbone they need to get it done. I mean, the one backbone I'm familiar with, and this is true in the air statutes and the water statutes, if they don't do it, someone can sue to make EPA do it, and then EPA comes in as the 800-pound gorilla, and then finally people talk. That's still a long process. And it's always preferable for the state to get their job done, and in this case, there's a huge incentive for the state to get this job done so that all kinds of other things can flow from it. No pun.
Randy.
Well, Joe is going to summarize at the interest of time once again. I'd like to hear the summary, and if I agree with it, then I'd be happy to move on.
Is that a threat?
Okay.
Promise.
First of all, the context for this is really important. And I've heard clearly from a couple of council members. I'd already written that down. I wrote some more notes about that. So the context is a really important thing moving into the policy. I've heard no suggestions that the first part of the language, ERP1 down through option 2, be revised. What I think I have heard and what I believe would be something that maybe not everybody would exactly agree with, but is close enough that everybody could probably live with, would be something like the language that's down here: by June 30th, 2013, the council will request an update, except we'll probably say the council will routinely request updates. We'll probably change it from just one time and say we'll routinely request updates. And at the end, the council will consider, if the board indicates that it cannot meet the dates provided, the council will consider actions to help or prod and assist the state board to get to resolution, something like that. And I haven't got the exact words, but I think, based on what I've heard and on the information I've heard from other stakeholders, that these specific threats can come out, but that we should say that the council is going to take action, whether it's action that may help the state board move ahead more quickly or may prod the state board or other parties to move ahead. And so I want to somehow say that. And I see two people over there that disagree with
Just for
ordinance.
clarification, why would you change "will consider and amend the Delta Plan to achieve progress in the co-equal goals"? Are you because you're changing that wording too?
Well, I think I'd say that we'll consider actions and may amend.
It seems to me prod is a lot vaguer than "will consider and may amend the Delta Plan." So if that's what you intend, then
I think I would leave in "and may amend," but I think there are many actions, most actions that the council could take.
Correct. I'm not against the prodding concept but I thought you wanted to keep the language that we may consider and amend the Delta Plan, which I think is pretty strong, and I'm supportive of that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we agreed was to take out threat.
Yeah, and that's what
The
taking
word
out
threat.
well,
Or even the implication.
yeah, it's the implication.
Randy.
I think it's fine to state the obvious, that we're going to be monitoring and reviewing. Anybody that's been a part of these proceedings knows that this is one of the biggest issues, and we're not going to walk away from it. But I would offer once again my recommendation to change or add another sentence in the policy stating that we're encouraging the state board to, within their purview of water quality standards, to consider all of the things within their purview to enhance the environment of the delta, and including flow. So water, in substituting flow requirements with water quality objectives, which is really including blah, 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 because it's water quality objective proceedings that the state board is undergoing. Or at least that's what we're encouraging them to do. We're encouraging them to do,
So
to take a look at
substitute
more than flow.
with flow objectives, the updated water quality control plan, including flow
Well,
objectives.
we've had
Yes.
continuing discussions at this point. Mr. Stevens, you're sitting there in the back hoping to avoid participation in this point. I just want to make sure legally we're talking about a term. I'm sympathetic to Randy's suggestion, but I want to make sure it's the right term. And if it is the right term here, elsewhere in the Delta Plan, we should standardize the reference to it so it becomes consistent. That's something, we had a problem in the fourth draft, and
It is
big
the
problem in
correct
the
term,
fourth
and
draft.
in fact, the title in what we're writing for this is the water quality control plan update. So
I guess the one confusion I have is flow about water quality, or is flow about fish population and invasive species and all the rest of that?
Yes,
both.
All of
yes.
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 Because can I help explain, or do you want to?
no,
Your flow has a lot of
Okay,
implications.
speak into the microphone.
Flow has a lot of implications because it has to do with, you need enough water going through certain places to accomplish certain things. Sometimes you need enough flow to make sure it's the right temperature. You know, less water, hotter it gets. Stuff like that. Sometimes you need flow to disperse, like when, before the pretty massive cleanup of Iron Mountain Mine, there would be flow that would go to dilute that. I don't know if that ever counted in the flow standards or whether it was just operational. You need flow to keep salinity at a certain level outside. So it's a whole variety of things, but quality is definitely a piece of it too.
Okay. All right, who in the audience wants to talk to us about this? I don't care. Somebody come forward. Mr. Rentz, you haven't spoken. You just arrived. So you've got a blue form. Oh, I'm sorry, Gloria. I apologize.
Language.
not threat.
Because I guess my question is, if the state board is not
You got to get closer to the mic.
by 2013, what legal authority do we have to do anything except to amend the Delta Plan, which is what I heard Pat say? So what language would you use to do that? I like the word encourage or whatever else, but just give me some examples of how you would say that would encourage the state board to do the standards.
Well, you might, the council might choose to hold hearings and make them more formal hearings where they bring people in and talk through the issues. The council might choose to make specific recommendations to the state board about what the flow objectives should be or how they should implement the process. The council could sponsor workshops that bring together key
Yeah.
parties. There are any number of things that the council could do besides the kind of threatening things that were in the plan that I think we're
Yeah, I like more collaboration with agencies.
I get that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why we're recommending taking out those other specifics.